What's not boring are Assassin's Creed leaks.
Oh my god.
Let's get to this real quick. And
Okay, did you hear about them?
I did. I had
Are they new to you?
somebody on stream actually reach out and shared these with me in kind of a bullet pointed format, which I put in the doc, which is handy. But why don't you give the quick and dirty breakdown?
Yeah, so remember, I think a few weeks ago on the podcast, we talked about this Ubisoft Quebec writer who updated their LinkedIn to show the female lead for the game. And that kind of was for Jonathan, the French YouTuber who has sourced inside Ubisoft, has been right many times. It was kind of like a starting shot. It was like, okay, if they're leaking it, I'm going to go ahead as well. So he put up a video with a lot of new information. And while we are first really focused on, okay, there are going to be two protagonists again, similar to Syndicate. They will both be in the world. We can switch between them. And way more than Syndicate, they really seem to be quite different in terms of gameplay. So that's going to be exciting. And now we learned some extra things. So for one, the map will be bigger than Valhalla's, but smaller than Odyssey's. And I want to hear your take on that. I'm like, let's go.
I mean, for me, it's all about the setting and the quality. For Odyssey, it kind of skews the calculation because so much of that was water, to say like, oh, it's bigger than Odyssey or it's slightly smaller, it doesn't really mean much because land mass is mostly what matters. But for Valhalla, or as we say here,
Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
I think it does. In fact, it could be a concern. It could be a concern because like England was so flat and so boring. It was just like generic forested land. Insert here. Yeah. Like there was nothing really unique about it. But if they have actual points of interest, unique cities and stuff, then I'm happy. Like for me, it's mostly about cities, and hopefully we actually see some of those.
And I think they also said already, like as sort of confirmed detail, that there, of course, with this being the first current gen title, that we should also like the forests should be way more dense. Like it should be just the environment itself should also be more interesting to explore. Mm-hmm. Internet Mouse, it's me, Joe Raptor. Welcome.
You're not XQC.
No. So also what they seem to be kind of continuing, which we kind of saw in a limited version in Valhalla, where instead of having the icons, you saw like kind of like colored dots. Seems like in Red, they are going to have even less markers and less guidance. So similar to Elden Ring. And Jonathan also said in his video that like Ubisoft titles have been doing this recently, where you have like the exploration mode and the guided mode. Guided is more traditional, where you're like, okay, there's the icon, I'm gonna go there. But exploration is like, look for this cave, and the town next to it will have a man standing right there. That you kind of have to like figure out where you have to go. That seems to be the default mode in Red, and we don't know if there will be also a guided mode. So basically, they want you to explore a bit more than in previous Ubisoft titles, which I think is a good thing. And one way to do that is the grappling hook. It should be like Sekiro, but it won't be that you're like shooting it and then you're like kind of zipping to it and then you're suddenly on the top of a building. No, it will be more like you're using it and then you still have to climb up that building. But it's probably used to, for example, if there are no things where you can like grab your hands, you can still, get up on that wall.
Which I think is interesting. I think it's a good middle ground between like the zip, of something like Assassin's Creed Syndicate or Sekiro and the parkour systems that they've built, like making it so it's something that's not totally overpowered, I think is a good idea.
Yeah. And maybe this also means that while, of course, in Odyssey and Valhalla and Origins, you could like climb everything, maybe that's not the case in Red anymore, which was also not the case in Mirage. Now, this is a big one, the ability to prone, like in Metal Gear Solid. And there should also then be different types of grass. So we have the typical tall grass, where if you crouch, you're already hidden. But seems like they're also making like small grass or whatever we want to call it, where you can only just prone and then be hidden. That should totally like create some cool new stealth things. You can hide in the shadows now, extinguish torches. So basically create your own dark spots, so suddenly an enemy cannot see you. They're very like making it more like Splinter Cell, which I think is a cool thing. Like playing Mirage, it was cool they brought the stealth focus back, but at the core, it was still very much the same stealth we had already for a long time. So finally, improving on that with new stuff is really cool. So they're also bringing back gadgets for Naoi. That's the female character. She can use a kunai, a shuriken, a smoke bombs, and bells. And it was not known what the samurai sort of male character can use, but probably different tools. So yeah, that also should make probably the female character, who's more like a ninja type assassin character, more stealthy, while the samurai probably can still do stealth, but will have maybe tools that are better in melee combat. So you can kind of switch between that. They also talked about a posture system similar to, Jonathan says Sekiro, but Ghost of Tsushima had that, of course, as well.
Yeah.
Where you kind of, depending on the enemy, change your posture and then try to, sort of break their defense. So you open them up for some powerful hits. Yeah, and that also means that the NPCs are a bit harder to take out, which is cool. And yeah, there are of course going to be a lot of camps. So you also have commanders, and then when you're like battling that commander, it also really sounded like Ghost of Tsushima. I don't think you have this sort of standoff at the end, but you can then at the end decide, am I going to kill this commander, get his equipment, or am I going to turn this person into a spy for me, who will then find missions and other points of interest for me. So you can kind of, decide, do I want to have some extra info, or do I just take all his stuff and not have him work for me? There should be enemies with guns, which kind of hints at like a later setting, so maybe 16th century or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's interesting because we haven't seen those in the RPG games yet. And the graphics won't be quite like Star Wars Outlaws, but definitely be better than Valhalla and Odyssey, which makes sense because, again, it's a current-gen only game. And I think that's fine because I still think if you go back to Origins or something, it still looks pretty great.
Yeah.
So, sounds pretty cool.
There's a lot. There's also, and again, I don't speak French, so I haven't been able to confirm this manually, but there was also apparently a mention of a sort of spy system where there's camps with commanders inside of them. And when you go to the camps, you can either kill or spare the commander. If you kill him, of course, you get some extra loot. But if you spare him, he can become a quote unquote spy, which could give you info for missions, side missions, main quest activities, things like that, which could be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's a cool, interesting thing for the choices that we, of course, have. Because I'm curious if they will bring them back. I totally think so. But there's like another way to not have them maybe impact the narrative, but still the gameplay. Although I don't think I think it's going to be very similar to, for example, the NPCs in Far Cry that are just walking around and they're like, oh, did you know there's an outpost over there? Like something like that. So I'm not like expecting very impactful things.
I could see it working similar. I mean, what it made me immediately think of was like the Shadow of War or Shadow of Mordor stuff, when you have an informant and then you get intel from them for a specific target, where you might find out where they are at a certain time. So something like that. I mean, I think that could be interesting and cool. Somebody also said, wouldn't they technically be opposed if one is a ninja, one's a samurai? I mean, they did a similar thematic thing in Ghost of Tsushima, where it's like two opposing tactical approaches, and even it's tied up in the ideas of honor and what's respectable, and do we really want to win dishonorably? Is that even worth it at that point? And then like comparing those two and putting like people who approach these situations very differently in the same situation, trying to fight towards a common goal, I think is really interesting. I mean, it builds conflict right into the relationship between the two main characters, and I think that could be really, really cool. So
yeah, and that was kind of for me for Ghost of Tsushima, because it was, of course, from Sucker Punch. Like in Infamous, you could really kind of choose, am I gonna be good or bad? But in Ghost, it was like you're always becoming the ghost, so you're always becoming kind of someone who's like, I'm not gonna live by the rules of the samurai. So I'm curious how they're gonna do that in this game. But I, at least like, because this really sounds on a sort of skill level, like sort of as sort of a, like Odyssey was really focused on, do you have the right gear? Do you got like the best like build setup, the abilities unlocked? And it seems like they're now going back to, okay, but are you actually good as a player? And I do think that that is kind of exciting as well. By having the different stances. Maybe you can have that flame sword from the Helix store, but if you always use the wrong stance, you're still gonna be a bad player. Like, I'm curious what the sort of balance will be between, the RPG elements, which are totally going to be there, and the sort of skill based gameplay.
Yeah.
You have to be good as well.
I'm a fan of most of this stuff. I think it sounds really interesting, and more than anything, it just sounds very different than what we've had at this point.
We
for
needed
a
this.
handful of games, and so you better believe when it comes out, there's going to be a lot of people that are like, "What is it? This is not at all what I was expecting." But I think this is what they need to do. What's going to be really, really freaking funny is if they release Ghost of Tsushima 2 and this in the same rough period. Because then it will actually be a direct head-to-head. I mean, people joked when Ghost of Tsushima came out that it was basically what Assassin's Creed should be. And so to see games that now share very similar settings and will be sharing gameplay mechanics and stuff go head-to-head could be really, really interesting. So it's going to be cool to watch. But, I mean, the more I hear about this, the more intrigued I am. Which is
They
more
at
than can
least
be
seem
said
to
for a lot of
go their
games.
own path. Like they at least seem to focus on different things, I think, than Ghost. Although Ghost also set up like a potential second character that was gonna be very important. I'm curious if they're. I mean, all the Sony games have been following this. We start with one playable character, and then in the sequel, you suddenly play with more characters. Like, if Ghost is gonna do that too, then it will suddenly be pretty similar again. But we will see. I do think though that Ghost is not 2024. We would have had an announcement, I think, by now.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, maybe they're planning, like, we don't know everything that they're doing, but they could be working on a more expanded multiplayer game. Which,
And launch that first. I mean, that could be.
Maybe.
I do think though next year is gonna be wild in terms of these like types of games with Rise of the Ronin. I think Ghost is gonna come to PC as well. Assassin's Creed Red, like. It's gonna be crazy. Black Myth Wukong, of course, like a lot of these sort of Asian setting style games, which I mean we've seen over the last few years as well. But
it'll be the year for it for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
He took my thing.